Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this photography session. And today we have Mr. Sridhar, the president of the Alumni Association, taking the lecture today. So, right now, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Sridhar.
Thank you, Rakesh. And I am not here as president of IIT MA. I am here as a photography enthusiast. I am equally interested in photography as all of you in this room. And today we've had three sessions on what I would call software. We started with an introduction to photography. We started about a little bit about the exposure triangle, the EXIF data and all that. And then Praveen had two sessions on. He started with aperture and then he covered shutter speed and ISO. So today, what we are going to do is we are going to be talking about hardware. We're going to be talking about equipment, and we're going to be talking about different kinds of cameras, different kinds of capabilities. And my objective in this session is to give you a little bit of the science behind these things, so that you guys can make understand how these things work. See, if I start going into depths of how an image sensor works, I'm sure there are, tons of papers and all that kind of stuff, which can possibly take us a long, long time. What we are going to give you is an inkling into how these things work, so that for yourself to understand how to make choices, right? So there are choices for every budget, but each of them have some limitations. So understanding the pros and cons of, okay, what will I get if I move from here to there? Or what will I get if I, let's say, choose a budget that is slightly smaller? What will I lose? So this is the idea that I want you to get from this session. So, and what I will do is also go through my own equipment that I have, and we will literally open this bag. So I will literally talk about this bag, right? So the bag that is here, we will talk about the bag as well as all the equipment that is inside. So we will talk about that, and then we will discuss what are the different things that go into buying a well-rounded system. Okay, so with that, let's get started with the presentation. Okay, is my screen visible to people? I know that all of you are muted. Rakesh, is the screen sharing working?
It's working, sir.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's get started. This is session 3A, if you note. I had initially planned to cover equipment as well as advanced options in the camera, and I found that that will have to be deferred to another session. So let us go into equipment, and then we will cover advanced methods, which is more on focusing, metering, and white balance. Very, very important. Options in the camera. We will discuss how they are important, how they work, how they affect your photography in the next session. Okay, so let's go into equipment. So I am Sridhar Boragwan. Yes, I am the president of Alumni Association. I am also a photography enthusiast. I graduated in 91 in civil engineering BTech from Jamuna Hostel. And I won't bore you with my biography, my career, personal life, and all that. What we will talk about is my photographical biography, right? So I started with a film camera called Rebel X. This was, I would say, 93, 95 or something. And some of you from that time must have remembered ads like these, right? This is Andre Agassi, and Canon came up with a tagline that said, "Image is everything." And he specifically was brought in to push this rebel line of SLRs, and these were the entry level SLRs that Canon had brought, which had good functionality, but still was good for a budget, right? So this was the original Canon EOS Rebel, and image is everything. It actually Agassi has since told that this image is everything also affected him personally because he, came out as he was a very flashy guy at that time with long, streaked blonde hair with highlights, and his game was a lot of it was seemingly built on Flash. But he was, what he regretted is that his game had a lot of, fundamentals as well that he did very well. But a lot of people thought because of this ad campaign and all his, the how his appearance, that it was just an image rather than he lacked substance, right? So that is some history lesson for later. But the camera that I ended up buying was this EOS Rebel X, and you can see an old ad from there. So after a while, after another maybe a few years, I bought a camera called this 490Z, which was an APS film camera. So it wasn't the 35 film; it was a new type of film that came out, and this mostly my wife used. It was an excellent camera that had the ability to shoot landscape orientation, portrait orientation, and the normal 3 by 2 or 4 by 3 orientation as well. So all three orientations were possible, and this is a film camera with a very good zoom lens. And then slowly moved into digital, and then some of these digital small cameras came, and then I ended up buying this PowerShot TX1, very unusual looking camera, almost like a handheld camcorder, but it was actually a still camera that could do very good video. At that time it was HD with quality video, and it had a very good zoom lens, unusual form factor for a camera, but worked very well. And then came my first digital SLR. This is 2006, Rebel XTI, and then I had also two lenses that go with it. Fairly bulky package compared to the things that I had been using, but very similar in terms of the Rebel X, in terms of weight and so on. And we will go through all these lenses and cameras and all that. And then 2009, I upgraded to full frame. So this XTI was APS-C. We will talk about what these things are. And so I upgraded to full frame. I bought a 5D Mark II that was released around that time. And then I invested heavily in good lenses. So that is the other information that you see. And this served me for a really long time. I didn't, there were lots of cameras that I could have upgraded to, but yes, budget was a concern. We will talk about that afterward. In 2021, I upgraded to the EOS R5, and and again a similar set of lenses that I had before. Okay, so I primarily shoot wildlife and landscapes. I also like to take photographs of my daughter. She is a Bharatanatyam dancer, so I like to take her dancing and other people in her dance school dancing Bharatanatyam, and portraits as and when required. So, with that introduction, let's go into what the equipments are. And this is more to show you the scale of equipment, right? So the first one on the top is a professional camera. It's the R1, and to it is connected the one of the biggest lenses that you can buy right now, which is the 600 f4. And you can see the camera is 150 and the lens is 472 long. and the camera weighs 1 kilo, okay, 1115 grams, and the lens weighs 3 kilos. Okay, so total weight of 4.1 kilos or 2 kilos that you're holding in the hand. These lenses are so heavy that pretty soon after, let's say, an hour or something, especially this is a wildlife lens, right? So if you're not putting this on a tripod, your arm will get very tired and it's very hard. The next one, in comparison, look at the difference in size. This is the camera that I have currently, which is the R5 and a 2470 lens. Both of them are actually heavy, but in comparison, it is nothing. The one after that is an APS-C camera, and the last one is a point and shoot. So let us go in depth with these cameras. Again, I attach that large lens mostly for just to show you a scale. But let's look at the R1, right? The R1 is a professional full frame camera. It's 24 megapixels, and full frame means that it is the sensor is the same size as the film size, which is 36 by 24 millimeters, which the area of this is 864 millimeters square. And this area is important. We will discover soon why. Okay, so this was released in 2024. As we have seen, the camera weighs around a kilo, and the current lens that is attached to it, the 2470, is 900 grams. The equipment that I have is the R5, right? So this is it's a 45 megapixel camera, same full frame, so 864 millimeters squared, released in 2020. Camera is 738 grams, and the same lens, 900 grams. Now let's look at what we call an APS-C camera. APS-C camera is a smaller sensor, right? So it is 1/6 the diagonal size of the full frame camera. The area of the sensor is 329 millimeters square. So compare 864 to 329. That is the difference. That is how much smaller the APS-C sensor is. You can see that the camera weighs 370 and the lens is also much smaller, 181. Now, the one on the right, the rightmost camera, is a point and shoot, right? So again, these are all Canon. Okay, forgive me. You will see a lot of Canon cameras, lenses, and all that. It's just because I have Canon, I've chosen to show Canon equipment. The other systems are equally good. Sony, Nikon, all these things are equally good. The last one is a point and shoot, which means that the lens is fixed. It is fixed. There could be zoom in that lens, but you cannot remove it. So that's what the other ones, the APS-C camera, you can actually remove this lens and attach another lens. So these are detachable lens cameras that allow for you to flexibly shoot different situations. Whereas this one is a little limited in terms of what you can do. So basically, if let's say you are faced with a tiger or something that is really far off, with a point and shoot, there is only so much you can do. It may have a 3x zoom, and you can zoom only that much, and then the remaining, if the tiger is really far away, you may not be able to see it clearly. Whereas with the other cameras, you can take this lens off, which is the standard lens, and attach one of these big monsters, 600 f4, or other zoom lenses that can take you forward and get a much better, closer view of the tiger. Therefore, the clarity is much, much more. Okay, so now let's go into the sensor. Again, this is the R5. This is a full frame sensor. Okay, so we are talking about the greenish area in the mount, which is the hole in the camera, is the sensor, right? So that is the size of the sensor. The opening that you see is called the mount. Different camera systems have different mounts. This is the RF mount. Okay, so it's the Canon's RF mount. Similarly, Nikon has a Z mount, Sony has an E mount, and so on. Now, what happens? How does this actually work, right? So you've got an image, in this case, a bowl of fruit, right? And the lens lets in light, and then all these sensors are actually black and white, by the way. So there is no such thing. Black and white, as in they can only record gray. Okay, so there is no color. So to give you the color, they actually put something called a Bayer filter or a mosaic filter. If some others don't use the Bayer filter. So that is number one that you see. So different sensors are assigned different colors. So, like for example, the leftmost pixel is assigned red, right? So it can see only red light, red colored light. So if there is, I mean, in this case, there is an apple, so there is red and there is, green, right? So let us say there is nothing blue in that thing. The blue pixel there will record nothing. So that means that sensor will be practically turned off. So this lets in only that colored light to pass through. The sensor records the magnitude of that. So if let's say the left top is very bright, it records a high value. If it is dull, then it records a dim value. And then after that, it goes to possibly an amplifier. And these are optional things, but most of the digital cameras have them. So there is an amplifier, and then it goes to an analog digital converter. So till step 4, it is all analog signals. Okay, so we are talking about analog signals. Digital starts only in step 4. There is an analog digital converter, and then sometimes there may be an image processor that might do things like noise reduction and all that kind of stuff. And then it sends it to a buffer, right? A buffer in the camera, so that when the camera is shooting really fast and the memory card capacity cannot write that fast, it puts it into a buffer so that it can write slowly, and the camera's shooting speed can go on further and go to the next camera. So, and then finally it gets recorded into the memory card, and then you can use this memory card and show it, upload it to other places and so on. So basically save the image as so, right? Now we talked about the sensor, we talked about millimeter squared, right? So let's give a perspective of where things are in terms of this. So we'll start with the full frame, which is colored cyan in color. So that is the 864 millimeter squared. And then you see the APS-C, which was the 329 millimeter squared. Nikon uses a format called DX, which is slightly different, 369. And then there are other sensors that are smaller, right? So the 4/3 and the Foveon, the 4/3 is a sensor format that is used by Minolta and Olympus and so on. And then we start to get into smartphone territory, right? So this is the 2/3 inch, 1 by 1/8 inch, 1 by 2/5 inch, and so on. These are all smartphone camera sensors. You can see how small these things are compared to the full frame sensor that is a in a digital camera that like an R5, right? For example, okay, the iPhone 17 Pro, latest iPhone latest iPhone, right, has got very good cameras, right? So it has got 3 cameras. The main camera is actually 71 millimeters squared. So that is right after that 2/3 inch sensor, and much smaller than this 4/3 sensor that you find in Olympus or Minolta or something. The two other cameras that the iPhone Pro has is actually 23.5 millimeters squared. So it is so small. Now we will talk about why this matters. The sensor size actually matters. Okay, so let us go into characteristics of the sensor, right? So what are the different characteristics of the sensor? One is pixel density, right? So you have a specific area, right? So you have, let's say, a full frame camera, and you're going to put a number of pixels in it, right? So that is the megapixel version of the sensor, right? So for example, that Canon R6 that you see is a full frame sensor which has 24 megapixels. So each pixel is 6.6 micrometers, right? So it is 6.6 micrometers wide, right? And it's a square, so it is 6.6 micrometers on each side. Now, then we start going down to cameras that have larger megapixels, right? So let's say the Canon R5, which is the fifth camera in that list, has 45 megapixels. It is packing 45 megapixels in the same area, which is 4.4 micrometers, because it is packing 45 megapixels into that 864 millimeter square, right? And then let us go down a little bit more. Praveen's camera, the previous instructor, has an A7R5. The A7R4 is similar in terms of megapixels. It is a 61 megapixel camera packed into a full frame sensor. So it's a 3.8 micrometer pitch, right? And then we have other, right? I said this 4/3 sensor, Olympus OM1, also has a small pitch because the sensor itself is small and it probably has like 24 megapixels or something, right? And then we have, other cameras like Panasonic, which are even smaller, right? Now let us look at where these smartphone cameras come in. You remember that big, sensor in the iPhone, which I said, is better than most smartphones. The pixel, it has, it has, I think, 48 megapixels. And so the pixel pitch with that 71 millimeter squared is 1.22 micrometers. Look at the 6.6 micrometers, with the Canon R6 and 1.22 micrometers. So much, much smaller, like literally 6 times smaller. The smaller sensors on the iPhone, zero point 0.7 micrometers, even smaller than that. So that is one of the big differences between your smartphone sensors, smartphone camera sensors, and the mirrorless or the SLR sensors. And now, why does this actually matter? This pixel pitch, right? Let us go in and take a look at why it matters. Okay, so we are also talking about these, SLRs are really big and bulky and all that kind of stuff, right? And it has possibly a lot of megapixels. Now, 45 megapixels in my camera, 45 megapixels has to be read out, right? Each pixel information has to be read out. Now, when you read out the entire sensor, it takes time, right? So, for example, you take a look at my Canon R5, which is right in the middle of that list. So 15.5 milliseconds it takes to read out the entire 45 megapixels, which is actually fairly good in terms of number of, in terms of the time. Like, for example, not to take names here, that A7R4 61 megapixels, 62.5 milliseconds. So it takes a little longer in terms of, 4 times as longer to read out that entire 61 megapixels. Now, the speed matters a lot in terms of, your camera quality. And that is why professional cameras that you see below that, right? For example, Sony A1, right? Or Sony A9 II, you look at the number of, or the time that it takes to read out that, the same 61 megapixels in the case of Sony A9 II, 6.2 milliseconds, right? Much, much, much smaller. That is because they are using a new technology called stacked sensor, and stacked sensor cameras are much, much faster. And then, Praveen talked about the global shutter, which means that literally you can read out the entire sensor in one, practically in a second, not in a second, literally instantaneously. That is why it's mentioned as 0 milliseconds, right? So mechanical shutter is 3 milliseconds or something. Now there are two technologies here. Normal CMOS is in dark blue, and then in the cyan is something called BSI, backside illuminated CMOS, which allows for the sensor to be read out faster. So those are the cyan ones. And then the newest technology is the stacked backside illuminated, say, CMOS. That is the fastest. So pretty much you can expect all new sensors to be stacked BSI CMOS. Now here I have not mentioned smartphone cameras. Smartphone cameras are actually stacked BSI. It's definitely BSI, if not stacked BSI. So their readout of their small sensors are extremely quick. So for them, they don't have a problem with the readout speed. So the readout speeds are extremely quick. Now let's look at the other characteristic of a sensor, right? We said megapixels are packed into the sensor, right? So let's look at so the more megapixels, theoretically, more resolution, right? So if you don't care about the time it takes, if I have, 1,000 megapixels in that sensor, and if the pixel sizes are good and the light is very good, I will get a great looking picture, right? So let's look at the latest Sony enthusiast level camera A7R5, which has 61 megapixels full frame camera, right? Let's look at I would like to draw your attention closer to the center of that wheel, right? And so let's say if this is the Ashoka Chakra, I know it has a lot more spokes, but look at the center and look at how far your eye can actually glimpse the spokes going in, right? So that is the limit of the resolution in the sensor. Now let's look at the next camera on the top right corner, which is the D500. This is the camera that Sam, our first instructor, uses. It's a 21 megapixel sensor. It was released in 2016. You can see clearly the difference between the 61 megapixel sensor and the 21 megapixel sensor. Theoretically, the pixels are bigger, right? But sensor technology has also improved, as well as there is more pixels in that Sony camera. Therefore, it is able to resolve better. Now, my camera on the bottom left, Canon R5, 45 megapixels. You can actually see a difference between this and the Sony A7R5, right? You can see that the Sony A7R5 is able to resolve a little bit more than the Canon R5 is able to. Now, interestingly, let's go to the bottom right corner, which is the iPhone X. Okay, now this is a 12 megapixel sensor. I couldn't find any data for something newer, right? Obviously, iPhone X is a very old phone, but I couldn't find anything newer. So, just for comparison purposes, you could see that it is the worst of the lot in terms of resolution, right? So, let's go to another aspect of sensors. It is called the dynamic range, right? So, the dynamic range is the brightest light that the sensor can capture along with the dimmest light. So the greater the dynamic range, the better photos it can capture. Now again, we are plotting different kinds of smartphones and cameras. You can see that the blue line, the light blue line, is the Apple iPhone 14 Pro Max. Okay, fairly recent smartphone. And you can see that the dynamic range tops out around 8. And then as you increase the ISO, it goes down to around 6. Okay. Now you compare that with, newer smart, the digital cameras, like let's say the R5, which is the brown thing, practically the one on the top. So it has, in low ISO situations, it has a dynamic range of around 12 stops. And then, as ISO increases, it is able to resolve up to even, 6 stops at an ISO of around 12,800, which is quite a lot, right? So, and, it is actually decent beyond that as well. Now, let's look at, we talked about more megapixels means, could be a problem. Let's talk about why that could be a problem. Why can't we just keep packing more megapixels into the sensor, right? So we have taken a very high ISO shot of these cameras. Top left is the another camera that I used to have, which is the 5D Mark II, you can see that at 25,600, which is like practically the limit of this camera, the image is very noisy, right? So this is a 2008 camera, 21 megapixels. Take a look at the D500, also a 21 megapixel camera, but released in 2016. And you look at how sensor technologies have evolved since then. Much, much cleaner picture in terms of the same number of megapixels for 25,600. Now, bottom left is the Canon R5, 25,600, arguably slightly even better than the D500. I would say maybe okay, but maybe even slightly better. Take a look at the one on the bottom right. Okay. Now you reduce the number of megapixels. Now this is a Sony A7S III Mark III. It's a 12 megapixel full frame sensor, right? So it is just packing in 12 megapixels in a full frame sensor. Look at how clean that image is. So the fewer megapixels that you have in the sensor, the cleaner the output when you're dealing with low light, right? So if you're if your shooting situations involve a lot of low light, then essentially choosing a lot of megapixels possibly doesn't make sense, as the bottom right camera is showing. Okay. Now let's look at other aspects of full frame versus APS-C versus point and shoot, right? So this is the depth of field when you have a full frame camera, right? So I'm looking at a 35 full frame camera. The look at the kind of shaded region on the girl on the bottom, right? So that is the depth of field. These are the areas that are in focus, right? So only a few centimeters before the girl, if the girl is perfectly in focus, if the midpoint of the girl is in focus, then a few centimeters below before, which is 54 centimeters before and 1.5 meters after is in focus. Everything else is kind of not in focus. So that is why the full frame camera has this depth of view for this particular focal length and this particular aperture. Now let us go to an APS-C camera. I am keeping the framing constant, right? So I have actually used a slightly different, focal length because I have to maintain the same focal point of view. So she fills the image similarly to a full frame camera, like that, right? So she is still, she fills the image from top to bottom. But in the APS-C camera, I'm using a different focal length. And now you can see that the depth of field is larger, right? So now I have 83 centimeters before the girl and 2.3 meters after the girl, that is in focus, if I'm using an APS-C camera. So that is a cropped sensor. If I'm using a point and shoot, right? So I have to go much further off to fill the girl the same way, right? So I'm using a much longer focal length, in this case, 143 millimeter equivalent. And you can see the depth of field is much larger. That is why we say, when Praveen talked about that in smartphone cameras, a lot of your picture is in the depth of field. It is because of the sensor size. So these sensor sizes play a role in these kind of views in terms of affecting your photography. Now let's summarize what we have learned about the sensor, right? So there are different types of sensors. There are medium format sensors that are huge, 1728 millimeters squared and more. Full frame sensors is 36 by 24 millimeters, which is 864 millimeters squared. APS-C, which is a crop sensor, is 329 millimeters squared. Smaller sensors are available, including smartphones that are, like around 70 to 100 millimeters squared. Now, advances in sensor technology have been extremely rapid. So, the same 21 megapixel sensor in my old Canon 5DR2 is 5D Mark II is no comparison to, let's say, a 24 megapixel sensor that is out today. 24 megapixel sensor can outperform it much, much better. Maximizing resolution while maintaining good readout speed is what you should look for when trying to get a good sensor, right? So you look for the biggest resolution while ensuring that your readout speed is fast so that you can avoid rolling shutter like Praveen mentioned in the previous session. So what do larger sensors give you? So it gives you more resolution because of the area is bigger, you can pack more megapixels. It gives you better dynamic range as we saw in that graph. It gives you lower noise and better low light performance. It also gives you a bigger field of view. And because of the depth of view is smaller, it gives you better subject separation for similar perspective compared to a crop sensor or a smartphone camera. Now, what is a con? Obviously, these are much bigger, much heavier. So you end up lugging, let's say, these cameras that I'm talking about. After about 2-3 hours, your arm starts to pain, and after carrying one of these big camera bags that I'm talking about, after full days of sightseeing, your shoulders are complaining, right? So these are, obviously cons in here. So now let's look at, I'm going to lenses, and here the obvious assumption is that it's a interchangeable lens camera, right? So where you could actually change the lens. Now there are different kinds of lenses, right? So one is something called a prime lens, right? So prime lens is something that has a fixed aperture, right? So a fixed aperture means that you cannot zoom in, right? So, and here I'm going to show you this, I'll stop sharing just for a second. And I will use my phone camera to show this particular lens, right? So this is the 800 millimeter f11 prime lens. Prime lens means that there is nothing, this only thing it does is focus, right? So then there are what we call as zoom lenses, right? So there is another lens that I have. This is a 100-500 lens. That means it can zoom from 100 millimeter focal length to 500 millimeters. And I can use, so for example, if I remove the cap, right? So so this is the zoomed out position. So this is at 500 millimeters, and I could zoom it in, and then it will be at 100 millimeters. So this is a 100 millimeter version of the same lens. So this is more flexible in terms of, let's say you have just one lens, and then you can look at objects that are nearby and further away, right? Now let's look at a standard zoom lens, which is more a walk around lens. This is the R5 connected to a 2470 zoom lens, which is what is called a standard zoom lens. Now this allows you for, it's extremely flexible. One of my favorite lenses. It allows you for, it's a very it handles all kinds of situations, right? So basically, you can use it for street photography, landscape photography, portrait photography, and if you're close enough, then dance and all that kind of stuff. So now let me go back into the presentation mode and discuss. Right, so we saw, for example, that 800 millimeter f11, and then we saw a zoom lens, which was the 2470 or the 500. And so there are other variable. Okay, one of the things that I didn't mention is that this is a fixed aperture zoom lens, right? So it means that the aperture in this lens, the 2470 lens, is a 2.8 constant aperture, And then there is a variable aperture zoom lens, which is the white lens, which is the aperture changes as you zoom out. It goes from 4.5 to 7.1. Now, there is something called a macro lens, which allows for you to shoot all these beautiful butterflies that we've been getting posted in these in our site, right? So this macro lens allows you to shoot those kind of things that are very, very close. So this is a 100 millimeter macro lens. Again, I'll show you that using the phone. So you've got a 100 millimeter macro lens that allows you to shoot at really, really close distances and allows you to magnify that image. Right? Then you have specialized lenses like this fisheye zoom lens, which allows you to literally capture 180-degree field of view. Right? So we are talking about a field of view from literally here to there. So everything that is in here, the photo will be slightly distorted, but that is an effect that gives you this fisheye zoom lens. It is similar to these 0.5x zoom and all that kind of stuff that you find in smartphone cameras. You find that the photo is slightly distorted. This one is distorted by design, and it allows you to capture a very, very wide angle of view. Now, there is other kinds of specialized lens also, which is called a tilt shift lens, which is mostly used for landscape and architecture photography. This allows you to change the perspective of the particular image by tilting or shifting. We will not discuss this. This is a really, really specialized lens. Now let's look at what lenses do, right? How do these things work, right? This is an extremely complex object, right? So you can see there are so many. This is a cross section of a 70-100 zoom lens, and you can see so many elements that have to move absolutely precisely in order for you to focus properly. This is a very expensive lens, so there are so many of these moving objects that do that. Now, how do we decide between what is a good lens and what is not, right? So there are these things called MTF charts, right? So these are charts that are published by lens manufacturers that allow you to say that this lens is fairly good and not, right? So the zoom lens, the standard zoom lens that I have, 24-70 2.8, is where you can see that the black line is fairly flat and it is closer to 1. The closest it gets to 1, the better the lens is, right? So the solid black line measures contrast, and the solid blue line measures resolution. So the resolution power of this particular lens is not as good. I mean, it is like 0.9 and it is kind of flat. Now, what happens as you're going from the left, axis? So from on the x-axis, going from 0 all the way to 25, is that it is showing you how good it is at the center of the lens versus how good it is at the corner of the lens. Now, Praveen talked about that the corners are typically not that great. And here, what you can see is that the resolution of the lens is actually, decently good. It starts at 0.9 and then goes to 0.75 at the very end. And the contrast is actually extremely good all the way to the right. And it's, so we are talking about this as a zoom lens, right? So this is the widest angle, 24 millimeters. At the at the other extreme, it is also decently good. Now, the dotted lines are the lines that is measuring the same resolution, the contrast, but in a perpendicular manner. The lenses are actually good in recording, images in a radial fashion. So as you look at the center of the lens, as you have lines going radially to the end, it is actually much better. Those are the solid lines. If they are perpendicular, so that if you're looking at concentric circles around the center, the lens actually doesn't do that well. And those are the dotted lines that you can see. And the concentric circle lines are, have a steep drop off as you're going to the edges of the lens. Okay. Right. So let's look at that variable aperture lens. So, this is one lens. Now let's look at that 100, 500 that I talked about. Similarly, at 100, it is kind of fairly flat, and then it kind of falls off at towards the corner a little bit. And now the resolution also has a steep fall off towards the very end. So you can see that in this particular case, at 100 millimeters, the resolution is not that great in the corners, right? So when you're using this at 100 millimeters, you better ensure that your subjects are at the very center. But if you're using this, typically why I would use it is as a zoom lens to capture objects that are far away. The 500 millimeter is actually pretty good. Even at the very end, the sharpness is, the resolution is very good. Now let's look at a macro lens. The macro lens doesn't have any zoom in it. It is, this particular macro lens doesn't have zoom. It's a 100 millimeter prime lens. So that means it has only one focal length and it has these kind of characteristics. So to compare lenses as to what you want to buy, look at these kind of charts, and the big, the more the blue and the black lines are to the top, the better it is. The more the lines are flat and don't show a fall to the right, it is also even better, even in the corners, right? So this is another lens, the first lens that we talked about. You can see that there is a huge difference. This lens is a fairly cheap lens, and you can see that the resolution starts in the center itself at 0.75 and then has a fall from there. Whereas all the other more expensive lenses start, closer to 1 and or 0.95 and so on. So you can see that this is a lower quality lens than the other ones. Now, tons of lenses in this particular Canon system. There is lots you can buy. That one on the top, the big one, is the 600 f4 that Sam uses for wildlife photography. Now, this again is it's not an advertisement, but it's just goes to show you that there is so many choices available in terms of once you get into a particular system, that there are cameras of all sizes, lenses of all sizes, and it's there. Now let's look at other equipment. We are running close to 8:30, so let's quickly look at other equipment, right? So we talked a little bit about the lenses. There is another thing called the extender, right? Again, I'll stop sharing here, right, so that you guys can see a better view of these things in my phone camera. So this thing is a 1.4x extender, which means that it multiplies the focal length of your whatever lens that it is attached to by 1.4 times, so 40% more. And then there are typically 2x extenders that multiply the focal length by 2. Now one might ask, okay, so why don't we just have these things permanently attached? Now, reason is that these extenders have a con, which is that when you attach these extenders, the aperture, the maximum aperture that the lens can go to also gets multiplied by 1.4. So, for example, if you had 2470 2.8, right, then you multiply that by 1.4. Suddenly, this becomes an f4 lens, which means it is able to attach or let in lesser light, and therefore really, really low light situations, it might not be able to take the same kind of pictures that you will be able to. Now, there are other things that are there are, this is a video microphone, right? So the cameras usually come with mono microphone, not stereo, right? So if you really want stereo sound, you may have to buy a video microphone like this, right? So this is a device that attaches to the top, and then you can attach that plug into the sensor or into the camera, and then it will record stereo sound, right? And then we have a flash body, right? So this is when you have dark situations, right? So you have flashes. Now a lot of the entry level cameras have flashes built in. A lot of the professional cameras don't have flashes built in, so you'll have to buy another flash. So this is one of the big flashes, and it allows you to illuminate objects that are really far off as well, right? So this is the extent of the camera bag that I have. This is an example of a reasonably big camera bag. So, for example, if I start to pack these things back in, right? So my 100 500 goes here, my 800 goes here, my 100 millimeter macro goes here, my camera body and the standard zoom goes here. The flash goes there, and here is my full setup, right? So this, by the way, is extremely heavy, right? So walking around with this for a long time is difficult, right? So your shoulders will start to remind you that it's time for you to stop during the day. Okay, so let me stop with that, right? So this is the extent of the presentation that I have for you. Now, the other thing that, okay, I also have something called a remote controller. The remote controller allows you to remotely take pictures of the, take pictures so that you don't have to, click and then run, right? So that is the remote controller. And then the flash I showed you, batteries,
The
of course, there
video
are,
top.
sorry. So the external microphones, oh, it is not sharing, is it? One second, one second, one second.
Yes. Yes.
One second. Okay, sorry about that. So you've got something like the remote controller that allows you to remotely, trigger the shutter. And then the flash, you have to have batteries because these things last, practically about half a day or something if you're shooting continuously. The external microphone, of course, memory cards, right? So nowadays with the resolution that you have, they produce large files, especially if you're recording raw. So you need big memory cards, right? The one on the left is a CF Express type memory card, which has a very fast writing speed. You see that 3,700 megabytes per second. The other one on the right is an SD memory card. You can see that the write speed possibly is lower. The read speed is mentioned as 270 megabytes per second. Write is probably a little lower. And of course, you have a tripod. Okay, the tripod is a very important equipment because it eliminates camera shake, and especially if you're going to take long exposure shots, you need a good tripod, right? And then the camera bag that I showed you, right? So you might want a small camera bag in order if you're, let's say you're carrying just that walk around lens, you might want to have a small camera bag there. Now, we've looked at a lot of equipment, right? So what do these things cost, right? So let's look at a few different categories, right? So by the way, these are not my recommendations. I'm not saying that go and buy only these and these categories. You do your own research, but these are, good entries in these particular categories. So if you take a point and shoot camera, right? Cameras like the PowerShot V1, Sony ZV-1 Mark II, around $900. Or you could have like Padma Priya does, like the Super Zoom P1100. I think goes from 25 to 3000 millimeters. Huge 125x zoom. It's around 80,000 rupees INR, right? So, and then entry level APS-C, which is the crop sensor camera, the 329 millimeter square camera. You could some things like the EOS R10 or the Z50 Mark II, and a body plus two lens combo. So one lens would be your standard walk around lens, and then another one would be a telephoto zoom, and then some accessories total might be around 1500 to 1750. Now, if you go a little higher, right, then you start to get into entry level full frame or very advanced crop sensor cameras like R8, R7, and Z5 Mark II. There, if you go for a body and two good lenses and accessories, then it'll set you back by 2500 to 3000. Now, the one that I particularly have, I call that like an enthusiast level camera or system, right? If you buy like, let's say the R5 Mark II, and then let's say three lenses and accessories, it could run between 8,000 to $10,000, right? If you go professional level, which is like the photojournalists and all those people use Canon R1, Z9, A9 III, and so on, which will be minimum of like $12,000. We are not talking about body. So this body, lens, and accessories together will be, if really no limit, right? So literally that one particular lens that we talked about, that big lens, that 600 f4, is $13,000 on its own, right? Or in Indian rupees, it's 12 lakhs, and there are many more lenses. So literally, money is no object for you, and with more money, obviously you'll get capabilities that if you want to use, you can. And I'll stop there. If you guys have any questions, happy to take some.
Thank you, sir. And one Mr. Naveen Ramalingam have asked, in which website has these plots to compare different lenses?
Those plots are available on the Canon Japan website. So if you go to the Canon Japan website and search for a particular lens, you'll find these MTF charts. For Nikon and Sony, I don't know. You may have to go and look at their websites, and you can see these MTF charts there.
And another, Mr. J.M. Mallikarjuna have asked mirrorless cameras. He just mentioned mirrorless cameras, nothing else he has written actually. So,
Okay. Yeah, all that I've talked about is mirrorless cameras, and one of the things that I mentioned is that I also have an SLR, right? So now you can look at the webcam that I am currently on is actually the 5D Mark II with a 2470 lens. So you can see that I am actually using like a $6,000, $7,000 webcam, right? But these things now with COVID, every one of these cameras are, you can SLRs as well as mirrorless. Definitely mirrorless is the way to go because those have the newest sensors and the latest lenses and so on. Okay, let's go to the next question.
okay, so we don't have any more questions actually, but
Okay.
I encourage the attendees to put some questions if you have any, so that we can answer you.
No problem. If there are no more questions at the moment, I will share I'll share the PDF, and I will also, if I'm there in the group. So if there are any additional questions, feel free to ask. If you are asking about just things like basically like what camera to buy or something like that, that is, is fine. We can have discussions because everyone will have different opinions, and the group is there filled with different people from different systems. So they'll be equally boisterous in defending their own system. I'm sure Praveen will say this Sony camera is the best, and Sam will say this Nikon camera is the best. It beats your Canon hands down, and I will say the same thing. So these are loyalties that you've formed over ages. Mine started in mid 90s, and from then on I've been with Canon. So these are things that just, I'm not saying that you have to be loyal, but I have chosen to be loyal.
Understood, sir.
Okay.
Then I
If
think we can
Yeah, if there is
we can
nothing
start.
else, thank you so much for attending, guys. And what we will do is we'll share the PowerPoint that I have in the group as a PDF. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to tell us in the group. And we will talk about advanced options in digital cameras, including focusing, and we will talk about metering, and we will talk about white balance on January 10th. So we're going to take a small break for the holiday season. So guys, all have happy holidays. Wish you guys all a happy new year, and we will see you on January 10th, where we will talk about advanced options in cameras. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session, and have a nice day. We'll look forward to meeting you on January 10th.